It was never new and it never gets old, and it's a folk song.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Underrated Podcast. This is a podcast where we discuss underrated films or ones that have slipped under the radar or just a little bit underappreciated. I am one of your hosts, Derek McDuff. With me, as always, is my co-host, Ariel Ortiz.
Hello.
And joining us today, we have a special guest, Austin Olivia Kendrick.
That's me. Hi.
Thank you so much for being on. Austin is kind of a friend of the podcast. She is on another podcast. She's the sound designer and voice of Adara on the Legacy Saga, which is a kind of not an actual play, but a D&D kind of inspired podcast. Also a shout out to our friend Irvin, who is also on that show. And then also, of course, she's a TikTok star. She is the TikTok. You can find her at aok.wave because, as we mentioned, she's a sound designer. Good sound designer joke there.
That's the extent of my cleverness. That's what we've got. That's the top of the line, y'all. Top of the line.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It beats any of my usernames, which are usually just my name or something dumb I made when I was 14. But today we are going to be talking about Austin's pick, which is Inside Llewyn Davis, a 2013 movie directed by the Coen brothers, starring Oscar Isaac and a slew of great character actors. This is kind of one of their. I would say it's definitely underrated in that it's not a huge hit like True Grit was, which made a ton of money and got nominated for 10 Oscars. This one has a much smaller, but I would say still very devoted fan base. But Austin, since this was your pick, why don't you go ahead and start us off here and tell us why you chose this movie?
Gladly. I first watched this film when I started at film school when I was, 20, 21 years old. And I remember it just kind of striking me, and it hit me in a very specific emotion that I can't quite wrap words around to this day, but it made me feel very deeply. And it's funny because to this day, it's been 5 years since I've seen it for the first time, and I watched it again for probably was like 24th time this past week to prepare for this show, and I still cried despite the fact that I've seen it a million times. And I feel like this film is very unique in that I feel like every time I watch it, I'm interacting with it differently. It feels like every time I watch it, I'm getting a unique interaction out of it because I'm in a different point in my life at a different place with different experiences. And this film is unique in that, and it's mostly because, I mean, spoiler alert, there's not much of a plot in this movie. There really isn't. It's just following this really deeply flawed protagonist. Like, he is deeply unlikable while at the same time being deeply sympathetic. The Coens are so incredible at making you feel for this character who gives you every reason to not like him and to empathize with what he's feeling and how he's interacting with the world. And I feel like because every time I go back to this movie, I bring a slew of different experiences and growth that, like, me interacting with that character, it keeps my relationship with the film keeps growing and changing and evolving. But, there are other films out there that are character pieces, that are just about following a protagonist. But usually with films like that, you see, especially with protagonists that are unlikable and deeply flawed, like Llewyn is, you expect to see from the beginning to the end the character learning something and growing. That doesn't even really happen here, because the very first scene in the film, which is him getting the shit kicked out of him in an alleyway because he was heckling somebody at a show, that very first scene, which you would expect, like, oh, our character's, in a bad place and has a lot of growing to do. And so we're gonna see him grow, as he goes along. No, the very last scene is the exact same one as the opening scene. So the movie becomes this Mobius strip, of this kind of just eternal loop, And so it kind of leaves you with this strange feeling when you walk away from it, because you've gone on this whole journey with this character only to realize, has he really changed? Has he grown? Is he gonna go anywhere from here? Is he just stuck in this eternal loop? And I feel like sometimes, especially as I've moved through adulthood, sometimes I get this feeling of, am I just in a loop? Is this just all there is? Do I just get up, go to work, keep myself alive, and then go back to sleep? I have days where it feels like that. And to have that very specific experience, and that kind of wrapped in a film, is something that I feel like makes this one very unique. It speaks to a very specific experience. And Oscar Isaac is also just really incredible in it. He's also very hot, so there's that too.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Also, I will say, God damn it, Garrett Hedlund in this movie. Like, I'm a straight dude, but like, especially when he has that mustache, and like, I will just say real fast that like, he's one of those guys who Hollywood was like, let's make him a leading man because he's just so handsome.
Exactly.
And I think he's like the same thing with Colin Farrell. He's a really good character actor who's just too handsome to be a character actor, and I'm glad to see him in that role. But that's a whole other thing.
And I also, I mean, like, if anyone's having like, hey, why should I watch this movie? You watch Oscar Isaac and Adam Driver sing a song about space. That was released 2 or 3 years before episode 7. So what more reason do you need? Please, Mr. Kennedy is an absolute bop, and I stand by it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You really hit on what I think was the main takeaway that I had from the movie. Was I loved how just brilliant and subversive the whole cyclical nature of it was, where it's like, oh, we start exactly where we begin. We see, even though it's like not like that kind of, you wouldn't really expect it to be that kind of movie. It seems like a very real world, but with the Coens, there's always something just like a little bit magical. It'll be like it's they were talking about that on this podcast that everyone should go listen to, Beyond the Screenplay, but it's just kind of a little bit out there. It's not exactly the real world. There's like the dude, like in the dude talks to the cowboy, and this one it's like, okay, things are repeating, and I absolutely love that. You mentioned that in most movies you'd see a character who is sympathetic but kind of a dick, and you would see him or her kind of grow over the course of the film, and kind of learn their lessons and eventually kind of do the right thing. Sometimes, though, you will even get the opposite of that, where you see a character who is like that, and it's becoming more and more popular, especially on TV, less so with movies, but you have that flawed, angry, like, protagonist who, like your Tony Sopranos or your Walter Whites, and they get kind of what they deserve at the end. But it's something, I can't think of another example where it's like, no, they end exactly where they are. You have Iron Man. Compare him to those two other types that I just said. You have Iron Man, who is a pompous asshole, grows and learns by the end of Iron Man 1 to kind of be a hero. You have Nightmare Alley, where you have Bradley Cooper in that movie. He sucks at the beginning, and he gets what he deserves at the end. But in this, nothing changes. Everything kind of comes all the way back around, and I think there's some things that they do in this that are really, really smart, that are definitely subverted. They're there just to subvert your knowledge of film and what you think should be in a film, or what should be there to be a good protagonist. And the whole cat thing, I think, is super interesting, because you have the Save the Cat thing, the most famous book on screenwriting, which is, in my opinion, something that has really hurt the film industry. And for anybody listening who doesn't know, the whole Save the Cat thing is, it's from this screenwriter, or Dan Snyder, who basically, the point is that if you get your protagonist, you have to make your protagonist likable. And how do you do that? You give them something to do, someone to save. And the example he uses is when in Alien, Ripley saves the cat, she saves Jonesy, and so you like her. And this one, he literally like abandons the cat in a car with a guy who's just OD'd on heroin, and he just kind of like fucks off. And
Yep.
it's not ever cruel. It's not like he does this because he's like, fuck this cat. He does try to watch the cat for a little while, and he's like, he kind of leaves, and he's like, all right, I guess I'm going now, because he's kind of that kind of guy. He's not the guy who is going to save the cat. This new movie is not trying to make this guy likable. There's another scene where it's a kind of Schrodinger's cat situation, where it's like, did he run over this cat? There's a little blood, so it's left, kind of ambiguous. And, then you see the cat come back, of course, at the end, and it's called Ulysses, which is, of course, ties back into the other Coen Brothers film, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which is also, the music was done by T-Bone Burnett. So, this is, the Coens have
And
talked
one of
about
the
how this
first
is.
movies that we ever covered on You've Never Seen,
Yep.
exclamation point.
Yep. So, it kind of ties thematically, the Coens have talked about how this is kind of a spiritual successor to that film. So, yeah, I really just was kind of blown away, and I've been thinking about it just all day leading up to this podcast about how impressive it was to really just give you something where nothing changes at all, and have that still be so surprising.
Mm-hmm. And he has so many moments too where he brushes really close to something that could have changed his life. Like at the
Yes.
very end, he is walking past a young Bob Dylan on the
Mm-hmm.
verge of becoming not only a superstar, but literally this massive piece of American culture. And it just passes him by like a
Mm-hmm.
ship in the night. And he just
Yep.
stays in this loop, and it
Mm-hmm.
makes it even drives that point home even harder that he has these little moments where it could have been him, it could have changed. It just wasn't. He just
Yep.
wasn't in the right place
Yep.
at the right time.
Exactly. Or like if he had, agreed to not just take the $200 and actually get the royalties on that thing, it would have changed his life. But he's stuck in the loop. He's stuck in that endless cycle that we said we feel so many people. And another great detail is that Oscar Isaac plays his dad, so he sees his future. He sees nothing changing, and I just love all of that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, I've been living with this movie since before it was even released. I came across this movie because of a special on HBO when I was just passing through, watching things. This special on the music and making of the music came across, and because I fell in love with it. I've always loved. I'm not very big fond of Bob Dylan himself. I'm actually fond of this music that came before him and the folk music, and was the inspiration for like a lot of the bands that I follow, like specifically Mark Mumford and Sons, which Marcus Mumford came along with Justin Timberlake and then Oscar Isaac himself to write this music for this movie. And this was, of course, one of the first instances where I kind of like became fully aware of Oscar Isaac Hernandez Estrada.
My beloved.
Yeah. I like to say his full name because that's how I think I prefer to name him, because Hollywood's the only reason why. But yeah, so like and that's why I have the albums and not just the actual album, but this is the one that the music special was on. I really do recommend it. It's Another Day. You can find it on YouTube. But yeah, so like it's just become a movie that I've fallen in love with because of the music mainly, but also the story. And you guys touched a lot on the cylindrical way of this story, and the Coen brothers actually kind of like loosely based it, or it was kind of inspired on a Greenwich artist that came right before Bob Dylan, and is essentially kind of like known to have just missed his shot, essentially. And that's why Llewyn Davis kind of has this feel of like something always going wrong with him and always missing out. I mean, like, and he's
Dave
definitely
Van Ronk is the name of the guy.
Yes. And he is just essentially a cynical man because he's like been put down or so much. Like, you get the sense that his father never really approved of him and stuff like that. He was always put down. His sister kind of puts him down, and like his ex-girlfriend puts him down, even though that she's essentially, you know, a slut herself, and like messes around with a lot of men, and like and could have been, most likely was Justin Timberlake's child that she was pregnant with, but she just wanted to blame him. And it also comes across as like he's never really recovered from the loss of his partner, who it seems like was his best friend, to the point where he just can't not let anybody else play his friend's part or sing his friend's part. That's why he gets angry at that poor woman, unfortunately.
And he won't team up
Um,
with anybody else, you know, which is heartbreaking.
yeah. So it's definitely, I even though like he is an asshole and stuff like that, for me personally, I understand him completely with where he's
Mhm.
coming from. I definitely am cynical like that as well, and kind of, not to his degree, but an asshole too. Like yeah, he's just is. I just love him in this character. This was like essentially when I fell in love with Oscar Isaac and Hernandez Estrada. The first instance where I did interact with him, but I mean see him, but I didn't know it was Sucker Punch. But this was the second one that like fully captivated me with his character. And yeah, like it's such a, like the Coen brothers do. I think that very much that they embrace this hero's journey. Like they have made, I think, in my opinion, movies that are like case studies for the hero's journey, with the like we said, with Oh Brother Where Art Thou, which is my first favorite of theirs. Just that's like straight out, that's the Odyssey. And so this one kind of like, yeah, being, it does feel like a successor to Oh Brother Where Art Thou, because it is another odyssey of a story with the cat, and it's alluded to that with the cat being called Ulysses, and then also him passing by the Disney classic Incredible Journey,
Yes.
and
Which they fudged the year. Like I believe that film actually came out like a few years after it was
mhm,
set. The Coens were
mm,
like, it's thematic. It's fine.
yeah.
No one's gonna be
They
checking
they
that.
should have just put up the Homeward Bound 2 Journey to San Francisco. That would have been better. It would have been a little more anachronistic, but
That's cinema. That's cinema,
um
baby.
but yeah, I mean it's definitely just like, that's why I really love the Coen brothers, Oh Brother Where Art Thou in this, because they use music in a really incredible way that I would really love, like if I were to make a movie in my time, in my lifetime, to use music in this way, is like creating a thematic story along with the music. And just the fact of like take for example, like when he sings Fare Thee Well, it starts off with like he in the timeline, in the the actual timeline, like it starts off with him kind of like remissing playing a record of him and his partner, who was actually Marcus Mumford on the record, but it's not his likeness. But yeah, so it's him playing that and feeling sad, and then you have the second instance where it comes up is when he's playing it for that group of friends, and then the girl sings it, or the woman sings it, and he gets upset with it, and then finally at the end it's him singing it on his own, and kind of, I think, like his life still kind of ends up spherical in a way, like repeating. But I think that there are like little nuances that indicate that he is growing, and he might. It kind of like it leaves it ambiguous in whether he will stick with going like and getting better, maybe, or if he'll follow that same line and still be an asshole and not get anywhere. But yeah, like so finally in the last instance where he sings Fare Thee Well, Dirk's song on his own, and it's kind of like, I think, like an accepting finally of his grief, of his like in my opinion, that's how I interpret it. But that's the beauty of the Coen brothers movies, is that there's a lot of interpretations of their stories, of their endings, of, and that's what makes them great storytellers, in my opinion, is just that you could take all their stories and, like you said earlier, of it can apply to your life differently in different stages of your life, and that's the beauty of the Coen brothers, in my opinion.
100% agreed.
Hmm.
And something that you touched on that I really feel very strongly about in the way of you mentioned is that Llewyn is an asshole, but you feel so deeply for him and you still understand him despite all of his actions. Like
Mhm.
he literally feels worse about losing a friend's cat than getting his best friend's wife pregnant, you
Well,
know?
that's not
You
his
know?
best friend. It's his ex-wife's or ex-girlfriend I don't even. That's the thing that
It's
too
never
that it's
it's
never
like
defined, and it's possible that oh yeah, like you think that it
Was
might
she?
be
I didn't catch that.
yeah,
it
it's never
might it's
quite
kind of like yeah,
it's
it's
kind
never
of
quite. It's ambiguous, like a lot of things in this movie, like even even her pregnancy, like originally, like I had thought that the reason why she thought it was Llewyn's in the first place was because Justin Timberlake's character Jim is sterile. But then like rewatching it today, I'm like, oh, he's not. It like clearly could have been like most
Mhm.
likely was his because Llewyn was like wore a condom and all that was protective. But it's so it's like very her character. The more and more you watch it, it's her character is like she's kind of twisted. She's like not a
yeah.
great person because it's
No.
like because
But
instead of yeah, it's just I don't I I love the actress of course, and that's one of the reasons why Marcus Mumford was so like involved in the creating of this music because it's Megan
it's
what's
Carey
Carey
I,
Mulligan.
Mulligan.
Carrie Mulligan, that's what it is, yeah,
Yeah,
but yeah.
but the thing is that despite how prickly he is and how kind of he keeps people at arm's length. He purposely pushes people as far away as possible. In the moments when he explodes on at that dinner when, she starts singing Mike's part in Fare Thee Well, when he pushes all these people away, but the Coens have a way of using the world. One of my favorite things about them as directors is that they are visual storytellers through and through. If their character doesn't want to speak, they will frame it and fill out the world around them that speaks for them. And so even though Llewyn keeps everything at his chest and does everything as much as he can to keep people out, the way that they filmed and built out the world around him speaks miles, speaks so much for the depths of depression that he's
Mhm.
feeling. The world around him is so cold. All the light in the film is so white, and it's the everything is kind of blurred at the edges. Oh, and it kind of feels like it's run through this filter, almost like an oil painting,
Mhm.
almost like the world around him isn't quite tangible. And so despite how much he's trying to shove everyone away, the world around him is speaking for him. And if anyone else besides the Coens had made this film, I don't think it would have landed. But they understand how to get the rest of the image to inform you of character. That is something consistent across the directorial styles. They're very fantastic visual storytellers on that front. And so I feel like even if you the first time I watched this, I couldn't quite, again, I had just started film school. I didn't know how to put words to these things, but there was something in me that understood. I had had times where the world felt as blurry and cold as the world around Llewyn was, and even though I couldn't wrap words around it, I was like, oh, okay, I feel for this guy who is clearly hurting very deeply, despite how much he's being as prickly and awful and as a defense mechanism pushing people away. I still feel it. I get it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And also
Yeah.
that shot where he's hitchhiking on the highway on the way to Chicago. I think that's one of the most gorgeous shots I've
Mhm.
ever seen.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
I could frame it. I
Yeah.
could frame it and put it on
Yeah.
a wall. It's stunning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
definitely. And
think
then also like they like you building on what you said about having these people around him kind of like base his actions and how he is, like take for example like and how he whenever he tries to fight back against like his circumstances, like the world always like fights against him even harder. Like take for example John Goodman's character, who of course is a staple of the Coen brothers, and in this part is just as bizarre and so
only he
out there
can play
and
that
thrown.
part.
He just always is. He's always great in the Coen brothers movies to come in randomly and have such a random like stint, like for example like in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, such a random character. But yeah, for this one, to have that whole conversation of like with Llewyn of I used to have a partner. He threw himself off the George Washington Bridge, and instead of like having any kind of sympathy, he's like, what kind of loser does that? Yeah, you want to throw yourself
off the Brooklyn Bridge.
Yeah.
So
and it's and then like Llewyn kind of like tries to fight back on that, but then like essentially like, and John Goodman's character like puts him like threatens him like with voodoo and puts him in place and stuff like that, and it's very sad.
It's clearly
to, like,
an empty threat, you know.
Yes, it's an empty threat, but it's like always everybody's gonna always hate him. So he's like at this point he's like, why even try? Why even try anymore? Everybody's gonna hate me. And
when he I've noticed in instances when he does try to open himself up, especially through his music, every time he tries to open up to someone, he gets a terrible reaction. When he plays for Bud Grossman in Chicago, and all he gets is, I don't see much money in this.
Yes.
When he tells Jean that he loves her, he gets a come on. When he plays that old folk song for his ailing father, his father shits himself. And those moments and another thing with the Coen brothers, they have this incredible mix of comedy and tragedy in the same moment. And those moments can be very comedic, you know, but that's also inherently tragic. In the moments where he's just enough to try to reach out, he gets shut back down, you know, 100%.
Yeah, just a fun fact on the audition, you could say, to Bud Grossman, which has my personally my favorite song of the whole album.
Death of Queen Jane.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful. I've always said, like, if I had the privilege to like share a stage with Oscar Isaac, that's the only thing that I would ask. Like, can we please sing Death of Queen Jane, because it's such a beautiful song. He helped kind of like create that song as well. But yeah, like kind of like quick fun fact with that, Bud Grossman is played by the same actor that played Khonshu in Moon Knight.
F. Murray Abraham.
Yes.
Fucking.
And but
I fucking love.
So
yes.
this
he killed Mozart.
So this could technically be the first kind of like downgrading of Khonshu to Mark Spector, if you will, because like it's
this
definitely
guy. He's a music critic through and through. All right? He listens to Llewyn. He listens to Mozart. All right.
We got the crossover event of the century. Okay, we're gonna cross the MCU with the Coen-verse. Just you wait.
Also,
exactly.
He's fucking great in Mythic Quest. Anybody who hasn't seen Mythic Quest yet, watch that shit right now.
That's how, like, I think Oscar Isaac was like, I know the perfect person to like downgrade me. Yeah, let's bring him in. So yeah.
Well, I really wanted to circle back to a couple things you guys were both saying really fast. First of all, Austin, it was a while ago now, but you were talking about how visually impressive these movies are and how well the Coens use their spaces around them and stuff. And I think a big part of that is they work with these really great cinematographers that they trust. This is one of the few times actually they didn't work with Roger Deakins.
He was unavailable.
Yeah, I know, because he was doing Prisoners, I think. But he obviously Deakins is the GOAT, but they have worked with this was also nominated for Best Cinematography. This is Bruno Del Benel, I believe is how you pronounce it. So he's done a few of their films. He did Tragedy Macbeth and Ballad of Buster Scruggs. Also some really beautiful movies like Across the Universe and Big Eyes, which, you know, say what you want about the quality of those films, I think they look absolutely stunning.
Gorgeous.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Across
Also
the
did the full
Universe is
Harry
a
Potter
great
book.
movie, and we're going to be covering it on You've Never Seen.
All right,
Question
well,
mark,
I've seen it,
exclamation
so
point.
I don't need to be on that one. But I do think that they work with the best people, and that they have such a good relationship with these cinematographers, and are able to communicate so well what they want and have it come across so beautifully in their movies. That's not by coincidence. And then also what you guys were saying about the kind of way that the Coens mix humor and comedy, and this is, I guess you could call it a black comedy. It almost is, but it is still a drama. And the way they blur those lines, even in the most serious Coen films, like something like No Country for Old Men, like they're even when they do their more serious movies like that, there's still really funny beats in them. And there's definitely, like, the whole thing about the Brooklyn Bridge is hysterical. And it's so true to life that even when you're in the most serious situations, there are things that are absolutely hilarious. Or when you are in this very funny moment, something can just change on a dime and just be heartbreaking. Like, for example, all the things you mentioned, Austin, like, I think the one that got me the most is when you find out that she has also been sleeping with that other guy, the guy who runs the
The
club.
owner of the
Mhm.
cafe.
Because and that's what sets him on his kind of drunken rage, and that sets him on that loop that puts him back at the beginning of the movie, is because to him, he was like, okay, like this affair, quote unquote, where they slept together, to him it means something. He tells her that he loves her, but when he finds out he's just another guy that she has, had a fling with, he feels absolutely useless and meaningless, and that is just so heart wrenching. And I know this is, like, I'm really glad you chose this, because this is a movie that I have been wanting to watch since it came out. And I think that's part of the reason why it does kind of get that underrated tag, is because of all the Coen movies, it's not one that is like everyone's like, oh, you got to see it. It's not like Oh Brother We're Out There or The Big Lebowski, where all the film bros are out there like talking about it. It's not in their top 4 on Letterboxd, but it's still just as good as those movies. And for
Yeah.
whatever reason, it didn't connect with it, or didn't get as big as those ones.
Yeah, if I said earlier that if any other directors had tried to tackle this film, I don't think it quite would have quite landed the way that it does. But if any other director had somehow managed to make this film and make it land as it does, I know words, I promise. Um, um, I feel like it would not be underrated. I feel like it would
Mhm.
be something that would have gotten a lot bigger. But the Coen brothers have this insane canon of films,
Mhm.
like, just uh, it's
Yeah.
words,
Yeah.
like, there's
I,
so many of their films are iconic,
mhm.
like, and are considered some of the greats of American cinema of the last few decades. And not one, not two, multiple that are amongst that tier of film and filmmaking. And so with a film like this that is so strong and such this beautiful capsule of a film, amongst that canon, it that's how it kind of gets this label of underrated.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It just
Mhm.
kind of gets a little bit overlooked in the shuffle of talking about those greats that have kind of entered pop culture,
Mhm.
and kind of the broader cultural consciousness. But
Yeah.
in my opinion, I think Inside Llewyn Davis is one of their strongest films as filmmakers, and I feel like
Mhm.
especially as creatives, I feel like this is the story of someone pursuing an art and trying to be creative, and that, again, that loop and that feeling of beating your head against a wall. Sometimes pursuing a creative craft feels like that, and you have these moments of, like, yeah, I could end up going nowhere. I could grind day in and day out and give everything I have, and I could still go nowhere. People
Mhm.
Mhm.
have. Countless people
Even if you're
before me
talented like
have.
he is.
Yeah, even if you're immensely talented, you could
Mhm.
still end up nowhere.
Mhm.
There has been countless people before me who have been just as talented and got nowhere, and there's that anxiety that is infused into it that I feel like comes from a very genuine place from
Mhm.
them, that can only kind of come from pursuing an art form, pursuing that kind of creativity.
Mhm.
And so I
Yeah.
feel like this film is even more personal than some of their others, you know,
Mhm.
and that's why I will argue why it's kind of, it deserves to be up there. It deserves it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
think
he
we said
can't even
about the
fail.
same thing. I think we said about the same thing when we were talking about Oh Brother Where Art Thou on our other podcast. Of the Coen brothers have such a prolific cinematography, or that, or I mean cinema history, that things just kind of like, it's just like they get kind of brought in as like, oh, it's another Coen brothers movie. They're watched by the diehards and stuff like that. But because Coen brothers are so prolific and create so many, created so many movies after movies after movies, that you know, it's kind of like bound for some of them to go, not be pushed by the wayside, but just like kind
Lost
of
in the
like
shuffle.
watched, and then now on to the next one. But yeah, for me, like I said, like I'm definitely sure that because for me, I knew about it because I love this type of music. I love which is a type of music that unfortunately like still is kind of niche, like Mumford and Sons are one of the few that kind of like have brought it out into the open. But even from like, please, like I said, go and watch that special with all the music. It's a concert, but all of those artists like Nickel Creek, or
Punch Brothers, who
Punch
also
Brothers, yeah,
contributed
Yes.
to this
yeah,
album, you know, and they're the
yeah,
ones who sing the All
yeah,
Triangle.
The Civil Wars.
Nickel Creek is Chris Trial's other. He has like three different bands, but yeah,
That
Punch
man is
Brothers.
just a
That's what I
boss.
meant.
It's insane.
Oh, I love
Yeah.
him. I love him.
I
I need
love
to
him
see
so
him in
much.
concert. Yeah, so for like the Punch Brothers, like which I've fallen in love with. Like if I were able to make a movie, I want to put some of their songs into, because they're just so brilliant. Please go and listen to the Punch Brothers. Give them some love.
They
But
just released an
yeah,
album.
oh, I'm so
Yeah.
so excited. But it's definitely just that about this story is like, it's all so meta in a way, because like you're taking this type of music that unfortunately it's like still on the outskirts of mainstream, even today, and so it's very much like telling that story of just being just right outside of the pop culture, you know. It still has a culture to it, but it's not the populace. So yeah.
And he tries to even sell out, and he even fails at that, you know. And I think that is something that is so meta, you know. Like I think, you know, because I think that the Coen brothers, I don't know if they have really tried to go super mainstream, but you know, have had their moments where they maybe like something like the Lady Killers, where they kind of like came on and did that, and I think they're a lot more comfortable not selling out and not being these big producers. They would rather fail. And there's this really interesting video that anybody should look up, where it's Del Toro kind of interviewing them about this. Guillermo del Toro, another prolific director, and
Another one of my beloveds.
yes, but it's to your point, Austin, about how I really don't think anybody else could have made this movie. And they were talking about how people kept asking them after the movie came out, like, oh, well, did you ever think about like writing a movie about a folk musician who's a success? And they were like, it literally never even entered our mind. And I think that, you know, the kind of the failure of the folk musician is just so kind of integral to like the kind of whole mythology around it, and it works so well with this story and of the kind of indie filmmaker. And you know, you brought up Ariel Bob Dylan and how he kind of features into this, and they mentioned him in that same interview, and how after he, you know, hit a certain level of fame, he kind of like he ends up you know, just kind of selling out, and people are like, oh, well, why do you like folk music still?
When
And
Dylan went electric in the 70s,
exactly,
at
yes,
the Newport Folk Festival, when he came out, it was I was raised on a lot of Bob Dylan, but when he released an album, and of course right now the name is escaping me. Of course it is. I have to look this up, or but basically after releasing, because it was Bringing It All Back Home. After releasing primarily these folk albums like The Free Will and Bob Dylan and The Times They Are Changin', he released Bringing It All Back Home, and it is split down the middle. It is, the front half is the traditional folk that he was known for, and the back half was, he was bringing in electric guitars, and he was bringing in more of that traditional rock sound. when he went to the that year to the Newport Folk Festival, he brought out an electric guitar. The crowd lost their minds. They booed him off stage. They booed Bob Dylan off stage.
Yeah.
Also, I'll defend that album. Bring It All Back Home is a great album. But it's funny because a lot of people confronted Bob Dylan about that, being like, "Did you like? You're not an authentic folk musician. You've given up. You've sold out." And Bob Dylan was like, "I don't care," you know, almost.
Mhm.
And I feel like with the film itself, there's this kind of question of authenticity, as like especially centering it on folk musicians, specifically the folk scene in
Mhm.
the 60s in Greenwich Village, where it's this perception of like, I feel like Llewyn almost kind of confines himself to this life of being a starving artist who's homeless, who's
Mhm.
bumming off people's couches and playing
Mhm.
basket houses, that thinking like, okay, that gives my art a sense of authenticity. There's that line when he's having his blow up, his meltdown at the Gorfines house, where he's like, "This is my art form, you know. This is how I pay the bills. This is how I pay my rent." He doesn't pay rent; he's
Mhm.
homeless, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and he takes it so seriously. He takes the authenticity of it so seriously, and something that's very meta that's brought in later on is that the woman that he actually boos off stage, that he heckles, that, you know, again sends him back into that loop where he gets the shit kicked out of him in the alleyway the next day. That woman is she's a woman named Nancy Blake, and she was an actual folk singer from that era. So when authenticity is literally right in front of him, it goes clean over his head. So he's kind of striving for this authenticity and this this sense of like, yeah, I'm a real folk musician, and it doesn't serve him at all.
Mhm.
And it even hinders, I feel like folk music especially is about storytelling. It is about kind of connecting with others through storytelling. And the whole thing that's driven home throughout the whole thing is Llewyn doesn't connect with people. He can't connect with people. That's told over and over and over again. You don't connect with people, you know. And so it's kind of this question of authenticity, both to that, like, I feel like is an interesting thing that they play with in choosing this specific era and this specific genre of music to put this character into.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
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 Sorry,
And
I did not mean
he's
to like go off
oh
like
no,
that.
no
No,
problem.
no worries.
No,
We've all been doing it.
he's but like that kind of he's very much like a character from one of Derek's favorite movies, La La Land, like in Ryan Gosling's character, of like just the question of purity of this art form, or you know, like music should be seen as being it's allowed to have metamorphosis and to be
Mhm.
creative. Like that's what, you know, it is an art, so it should have a creativity to it. It shouldn't be kept in a box. And
Mhm.
yeah, you definitely get that sense in Llewyn of kind of like questioning every almost every artist that comes onto the stage, of
Mhm.
like, does this work? Is this working for you? And even with Please Mr. President, you know, like just how it is working and it's gonna be a hit and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And
And
so it's very much like having, is are you gonna be obnoxious and stringent on what you think is right, or are you going to allow and accept the flexibility of what art is and what music is, you know?
mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that he starts to heckle her and boo her before she's even started singing. And what that reveals is that he is not booing her because he doesn't agree that her music isn't folk music. It's because she doesn't look to him like what he imagines a folk musician should look like. She doesn't fit
Mhm.
into his perception. This is some folksy housewife from like the south of the Midwest or whatever. So he's like just starts booing her and heckling her
Hmm.
before she can even reveal whether or not she is a folk musician, because she doesn't fit into his little box of this miserable little musician, you know?
I
Mhm.
think it's also because like he was pissed too. Like, and that's another problem
Oh
that he
yeah.
has, is bringing his own problems into perception of others. Because in that
Mhm.
moment, that's like right after like Poppy kind of like says like, "Oh yeah, I slept with her too," and
Mhm.
stuff like that. So bringing his problems into the like into the perception of how he perceives other people, and it's
Mhm.
kind of very very much like kind of impressing his own problems onto other people and like wanting to make other people suffer because he's suffering, which
Mhm.
is not the right thing to do, of course, but
And it's a
yeah,
very human reaction.
it's a
We've
very
all
human reaction.
Mhm.
Yeah.
and that's the thing is that again, going back to how Llewyn kind of just does best efforts to push everyone away. And from the outside on paper, you're like, wow, I don't like this guy. This guy sucks. Every time he has an outburst like that, it's like, I've been there. I've had moments
Yeah.
like that, you know? And it's like it's such a this film and this character captures such a wide breadth of kind of the human experience. And
Mhm.
even those moments where where he's again blowing up at the gore finds and really making an embarrassment of himself, it's like, oh, that's uncomfortable, but I've been there, you know? And
Mhm.
I think it runs you through such a gamut of again that kind of human experience. And the the line that it I mentioned that I cried again at this
Mhm.
movie, despite seeing it 2 dozen times, is just that line. It's so simple. It's at the end where he just goes, "I'm tired.
Mhm.
I am so fucking tired. I thought I just needed a night of sleep, but it's more
Mhm.
than that." And it's
Yeah.
like, are you like, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, I've been there too many times. And it's such a simple thing when laid out, but it hits so close to a very dark experience, but it's something that we've been there, you
Mhm.
know.
Currently in there, but
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's where I feel like this movie just kind of it captures so much of this of just going through life and those experiences that are very hard to capture when not kind of the Coens do things so their stuff is so complex yet so simple. They feel so simple and so accessible at the same time. And that's the only way really to that's the way life is, you know? And when you look at it, sometimes it's super complex, super layered, but really it's also simple at the same it's yeah,
No.
there's something in the simplicity that I feel like makes me feel deeper than a dense soliloquy about the depths, like that articulated every little thing that he was feeling in that moment. Just the simple statement of "I'm so fucking tired." You
Yeah,
know, it
absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut
no,
you off.
you are all good. I got no words left because I'm now I'm in my fucking feelings about it.
Good,
Again,
good.
it's that the Coens just they get to the core of their characters and they know how to get those characters to speak to their audience. And again, at the very beginning I talked about how I feel like I have an ongoing relationship with this film, and it is because the Coens know how to speak so directly to human experiences and eh, to just the way that life feels. Eh, That is why, you know?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And yeah.
It reminds me a lot of, when I was in college and I was taking some kind of lit class and they talked about somebody like Hemingway will give you like 3 pages of just telling you about how a character is sad and how they feel. And then someone like Fitzgerald will say that like he was sad and you get in just one line, you get hit so much with just that one thing. And I would say that the Coens are definitely in that second camp of just like you just need one line and it hits you
Mhm.
so much more than like a Christopher Nolan monologue or something like. Not to knock
Mhm.
Hemingway or Nolan or any of these guys, but you can just with just it's a precision shot of just right in the fucking
Exactly.
feels.
Yeah, this whole film is a precision shot right to
Hmm.
right to those points in your life where genuinely everything feels so heavy and so like, am I ever going to get out of this? Or is this just life now? Is this just an endless loop of feeling like I'm dragging myself through the motions? Not to be depressed, not to like be heavy or like down or dour or anything. I This film captures that feeling in the most authentic way to my own experiences. It captures it, the simplicity of it, the straightforwardness of it, the like you said, the precision shot. that they did with this film. It's I think it's why I love it so deeply. You know, I haven't come across a film that captures that that feeling, that heaviness, that sense that like you're feeling so much, but all you can say is, "I'm so fucking tired."
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Again, not to get on a dour note. Just
Well, it's a heavy movie. There's that, like we said,
oh,
it's
my,
got some heavy moments, the comedy and the drama all mixed together.
my fiance knows that if he comes home and I'm watching this movie by myself, he's like, "Oh no." Like, "Oh god, she's not in a good place. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no." Like that is my barometer. If I am watching Inside Llewyn Davis by myself in the dark on the couch, you need to check up on me. I'm not doing too hot. But it's
Oh
beautiful
man.
to even to have a film that speaks to those emotions very deeply. Doing that is not easy.
Hmm.
The Coens are so deft and so wonderful and have this really beautiful skill honed in to be able to do it, but like it is not easy to accomplish at
Hmm.
all.
Yeah,
Hmm.
no. I would say I get it. My movie like that is probably Inside Out. Like that's the one that I'm
Mhm.
just like, if you see me watching Inside Out, be like, "Hey, Derek, are you okay?"
And the answer is no.
Just over
And
here
that's
crying to a
okay.
children's film.
Yeah, you know, that's one of the whole things about why I love this medium. It's storytelling. We
Hmm.
tell stories to connect with other people and to feel seen and to have our experiences feel like we're not alone in them, you know, to have somebody that gets it. And this is that film for me. I have a lot of films that make me feel a lot of joy. You know, life is again complex layered thing. I've feeling a bunch of different things all the time. I have films that bring me joy that I can kind of resonate with that joy. But this is that film that kind of just reaches into that depth for me and really kind of oscillates at that frequency for me and just is special for me in that regard.
I love when I have a guest on or talk to somebody about a film that is so personal, because I just came to this movie and like and I obviously really loved it like watching it, but now just like hearing your deep personal connection is making me just like love it even more, you know? Like I'm like, oh man, I gotta bump it up from a 4.5 to a 5 star. I gotta go change my letterbox rating right now.
I love when we got on this call, you thanked me for, you know, coming on this, but genuinely just getting to talk with other people who just enjoy movies. You know, movies are so freaking cool. And I
Hmm.
just to put it as simply and as possible, like I it is such a gift to get to kind of share that passion with other people who get that passion and who have had films, even if it's not the same film, but have had a film speak to them in that way, who get it. You know, that's a gift. So thank you for like just letting me talk with you guys and to
Well,
get to
no, thank
share
you for
that.
coming
That's a gift.
on. Yeah, it's
Mm.
this
Yeah.
like this has been so awesome. Like I have had a blast talking with you about this film because of your passion is so real. I absolutely
Mhm.
love it.
Yes. Also, I will also double down on the recommendation. The album to this, the music in this film is unreal.
Yes.
The album is so gorgeous. The music is incredible. It is incredibly well done. They chose such incredible songs and then really made these versions of it that are their own, you know.
Yeah. Uh, I would go further. Besides getting the two albums, the actual album and then the concert album as well. Another project that came out of this, osmosis, like through osmosis, was this other project that T Bone Barrett and Marcus Mumford collaborated on that took lost songs of Bob Dylan and then kind of like transformed them and remastered them and created this other album with a few other folk singers called the New Basement Tapes.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Definitely,
yeah.
please go
Those
and
are great.
I don't know if I don't what song is do you have? What's your favorite song off there?
Oh
Do you
man,
Off
know
like
album.
it?
it's one of those things that just comes up on my Spotify every once in a while, so I don't I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Oh, okay. Mine's Eyes on You. Can't Keep My Eyes on You. That one's
Okay.
amazing. But yeah, go and check out that album as well, because it's such a very much like in the vein of Llewyn Davis. Such an incredible music, and it also has a documentary to accompany it, as well as the making of that. And yeah, just, and then of course check out any kind of like Margaret Mumford and Sons albums. They kind of like in the same vein as Bob Dylan have transformed themselves, and with their newer albums, and but still keep the heart of what Marcus Mumford, and Mumford and Sons are. Such incredible music.
Yeah.
And I will also extend that to Punch Brothers, who again just released an
Exactly.
album, Hell on Church Street, which,
Specifically, Ahoy, and is such an
all
incredible
ashore.
album. All ashore. Yep.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
one last thing, because I was clever. I thought I was clever in coming up with this, and if I'm not, straight up you can tell me. We mentioned earlier that Llewyn Davis is kind of loosely based off of a real life folk musician who was in the scene, Dave Van Ronk, who, he's all of these major players that kind of came out of that we know of, like Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell. Dave Van Ronk is there, in all of their stories.
Mhm.
And the album cover that Llewyn has
Mhm.
for his album, which is called Inside Llewyn Davis, is literally like it's
One for one.
it's a one for one recreation of Dave Van Ronk's album Inside Dave
Inside.
Van Ronk.
Mhm.
And when we say one to one, literally one to one.
Same picture.
Same
And
picture,
that,
same font,
yeah.
everything. But
Yeah, and that's the same picture I think was originally on the cover of the book as well, about him too. Uh-huh.
And
Mhm.
the fascinating thing about this, again, this is where I thought I was being clever. Probably won't. Probably, anyways. This film is called Inside Llewyn Davis, but we never get to really see what's inside Llewyn Davis. There's that moment where, again, the Coen brothers are so brilliant in the way that they write. They're such precision shots with their irony and with their with their humor, and also with the tragedy, is when Bud Grossman goes, "Play me something off of Inside Llewyn Davis. Play me something from Inside Llewyn Davis."
Yes.
And
I think
Llewyn
that's
has
the
spent,
only instance where we see inside, and he's,
yep,
of
when
course, is thrown
he's playing his
aside again.
music,
Mhm.
and he spends the whole film trying to make sure you do not see inside Llewyn Davis. That it's through his music that you really is the only time you really get to glimpse inside Llewyn Davis.
Mhm.
Again, I'm
Yeah.
not the I am definitely not the first person that has probably said that, but it's fine. I got two brain cells to connect for once, so
That's good.
Mhm.
take that victory.
But yeah, with that, unless you guys have any other last thoughts, Alan's usually the one of our co-hosts kind of who proposes a little question at the end of the show. He's off for the week, celebrating his anniversary with his girlfriend. So,
I have a
oh
question.
yes. Okay.
So since this is a music and about connecting and stuff like that, um, for me in particular, I usually latch on to lyrics, and certain lyrics where I become so infatuated by them, and just these single line lyrics. What single line lyrics have engrossed your soul, and at least for me, I've had instances where I will could keep repeating with that lyric because of just like the delivery of it, the musicality of it. For example, I yesterday, as one instance of mine, that's a lyric that's always stuck with me. Yesterday I went to the Bare Naked Ladies concert. And
Rad.
yeah, and they have a song called Pinch Me,
Mhm.
and just one lyric from that has always just, and even live, finally seeing them live, I've always wanted to see them, and finally got to see them live yesterday. One lyric in that song always brings me almost close to tears, or two tears if I'm alone. And it's pinch me, 'cause I'm still asleep. Please God, tell me that I'm still asleep. And that's just one of just the way that it's sung, just the music that goes with it, just the delivery of it is always just it just always encompasses me. So have you guys ever had a lyric like that? Like
Oh,
tattoo
God,
like
yes,
level lyric, I will say. Like
yes.
you'll get this tattooed on your body one day.
Very much so. Again, I was raised on a lot of Bob Dylan. My and really folk music is like I mentioned before, it's storytelling,
Mhm.
And Bob Dylan actually got awarded the Pulitzer Prize for poetry a few years back, somewhat controversially, But his lyrics very much are poetry. And as I was kind of raised, there was always music around our house. My dad always reminded me to kind of stop and listen to things, always listen to lyrics, and so I have countless ones, that I
Mhm.
could, but one that's been hitting me lately. I mean, it hits me every so often because I think an essential part of if you're in your mid or your early 20s, every so often you need to stop and listen to Vienna by Billy Joel and just have a good cry over it. But a lyric from that is, and you know that when the truth is told that you can get what you want or you can just get old. That the whole song, all the lyrics there, but just that always feels like someone took a fucking like frying pan to the back of my head.
Mhm.
you
Another
know.
one, just one more, because like this one I want to have on my future wedding band, inside my
Mhm.
wedding band, is from Dave Matthews Band's Inside the Idea of You, or The Idea of You, I think it's called. There's a lyric that the song is about pining for somebody and wanting and loving this somebody even though that they're not like falling for you, because you're inside the idea of you. And this one lyric that says, I feel it, it's as real as laughter. And it's such amazing, like to love, like it's like laughter so pure that to feel that love, it's as real as laughter. So that's another one.
Mhm.
I mean, I, like a teenage girl in 2013, have a lyric on my Instagram bio, which is I've been a romantic for so long. All ever heard is love songs from the XX. I just, me being kind of a hopeless romantic, I really, I that lyric just kind of always speaks to me, is that you just kind of see the world through rose-colored glasses, and I love the XX. Probably also every lyric the Killers have ever written would probably be something, but that's just their entire discography. But if I had to pinpoint one, it might be that one. It's just it could be, you could take it a few different ways, and it really, and it just sounds good too. Like it's a really cool sounding line, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll throw one more in because I keep
Mhm.
touching on Bob Dylan. I discover I kind the Free Will and Bob Dylan. The Free Will and Bob Dylan and Blood on the Tracks are probably my two favorite Dylan albums. But Free Will and Bob Dylan, I remember I listened to on loop when I was about 16, and I pretty much know backwards and forwards. But there's a song on it called "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right." I guarantee you've heard it because it's been covered a million times. But just the lines, "So long, honey babe, where I'm bound, I can't tell. Goodbye's too good a word, babe. So I'll just say, fare thee well."
Hmm.
Very nice. Very nice.
Just this good storytelling. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah. There. All right. Well, I did also have one question. Ariel kind of beat me to the punch, but I still do want to ask my film question, and that is, do you guys have a favorite music or a favorite kind of non-musical score? So something like this, which is, it's not necessarily original songs. We might call it a jukebox musical, but something like this where it is popular songs, a favorite soundtrack like this.
Are you talking like a Moulin Rouge or something like that?
Yes, and that was actually going to be my example. Was Moulin Rouge, a jukebox
Uh-huh.
musical they call it sometimes, which is
I mean,
I fucking love Moulin Rouge.
can it be anything else but Moulin Rouge? I
Right?
mean,
Oh
come
my god.
on. It's iconic. Ewan McGregor randomly doing that opt up in the middle of your song, on the I can't tell if they're green or they're blue. Like he just randomly starts scream shouting. It's
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
one of my besides Moulin Rouge, which I also have the album of that, and I love it, of course. But also bringing back to one of the movies of the cinematographer that we are going to be discussing fairly soon on You've Never Seen, is Across the Universe. I love that movie with a passion. It's one of
I'll
my
advocate
favorite
for that movie. I love
yeah,
it.
it's one of my top three movies of all time, in no particular order. But yeah, it's such brilliant thing to take these, and that's my kind of storytelling is I love taking songs and like integrating the songs and the lyrics specifically into like the storytelling and like kind of furthering the story.
Mhm.
Brilliant movie. But the music, how the music is utilized, how the different taking, classic Beatles songs, but twisting them in a way, tell the story of like what this character is feeling, what exactly are we trying to portray here, but still having that kind of classic Beatles music. But for example, like I Want to Hold Your Hand, in that is turned into like an upbeat music song that we all know into like a more ballad of this unacquitted love story.
Mhm.
And like that's just one instance in that movie. But definitely, I think, in my opinion, I think Across the Universe has to be my pick.
Yeah,
Yep.
I will also throw out, because you did get to Moulin Rouge before I did technically. I will throw out, I love Rocket Man. Oh my god,
Yes, yeah,
That
my
yep,
is my favorite music biopic for sure.
it's incredible.
yeah,
Well, the thing is, again, I was raised in a house with a lot of music, and I have very distinct music that I associate with each parent, and Elton John is my mom, and God bless her. But I think the thing about that works is that it frames Elton John's life in his music, and so
mhm,
it really strength, because we all know the music. We all know Tiny Dancer and Your Song, and Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, like those very iconic songs. But to tie it back to his experiences that he actually wrote those songs from,
mhm,
I feel like
mhm,
it's almost this gateway for us to connect to that. And the fact that they didn't just leave the music as like a diegetic thing of, oh, we're only going to play the music when he's playing them on stage. They play with that line of reality and have
uh-huh,
these fantastical sequences that,
mhm,
again, only further informs us of where Elton John is at as a character at that point in his life and in his
mhm,
story. It's just beautiful.
mhm,
That scene
beautiful,
where
yeah,
he's playing the troubadour and he starts playing Crocodile Rock and everyone starts rising off the
Yes.
mhm,
floor. My
yeah,
mom and I, when we saw that in the theaters, we were just like, goosebumps. We just, ugh.
yep, yep,
And the fact that
and
Taron Egerton did not get nominated for an Academy Award
I
for that,
know.
I'll always
No,
be bitter
no,
about it.
no. No, the whole bitterness between Bohemian Rhapsody getting so much love and stuff like that, but not Rocket Man, is just a travesty. And I bet you anything, if Rocket Man came first, it would have gotten what it deserved. But
Hmm.
and definitely a
Agreed.
better way of telling a music biopic. But we
100%.
also, on the vein of Moulin Rouge and these kind of and like Rocket Man, we have Elvis coming out by
That we
Baz
do.
Luhrmann, and
That's
that
true.
looks incredible, and I
Yeah.
cannot wait for that movie.
It
I
has
mean,
everything to do with us. Oh, mama.
Elvis is like sacrilege to my family, so you can't make fun of him.
I'm
My
Um,
making fun
dad,
of his impression. I'm not making fun of the man himself.
The
dude,
man, the like Austin
He's a good
Butler
impression.
does an
He's great. He's
incredible, and
great. He's great. I
he's
just love
gonna
that
like.
line
I
in the
want him
trailer.
already based on the trailers. He needs to win like he needs to be nominated at least just from the
the poor man.
trailers.
Have you seen the
Yeah.
videos of the fact that he's been unable to actually get rid of the Elvis accent, despite the fact that they stopped
Aw,
filming like a year ago?
he'll get
That
it better.
that
No, it sucks, but
Oh
yeah,
no, that poor man gave a lot for that
I
film.
know.
So
Yeah,
he
yeah.
deserves his flowers.
Uh huh.
But
Um.
my dad grew up in Vegas in
Oh
the
wow.
in the late 60s and early 70s, and he'll always
Mhm.
talk about how he saw Elvis in a dinner club when he was 5 years old, and he felt like he got struck by lightning. So Elvis is also one of those like kind of
Mhm.
like, again, like almost like religious figures,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
I
yeah,
was raised with a lot of
yeah.
music. And I feel very grateful that I was raised in a
Mhm.
house where there was always just really good music, and I was taught to appreciate what was being played around me and the
Mhm.
history and the
Yeah.
context and settling these artists and their story and the music they created in their contexts of why they created it, when they
Mhm.
created it, and why it
Yeah.
was important. So
Yeah.
I shout out to Randy and Kelly Kendrick. You
Yeah.
did a good one on that one.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
On the
I
same
grew up
vein,
in a
thanks to Richard McDuff, who my dad, who was in a shitty cover band in the '70s, but definitely knew his music.
Iconic.
yeah. Yeah, I grew up in a very similar household, at least from my grandparents, my grandmother. That's how I got my love for Elvis. And we all got our love for Elvis. And then it's even like grown more in the appreciation because my brother is such a music buff, and he just like becomes a historian on all these on all these artists as well. But yeah, definitely music, I feel, is like what, like we kind of touched on, is storytelling, but I feel
Exactly.
is storytelling in a very pure way than even visual. Like I think it sounds are such a primitive part of us that I think that with music it's so easy to engross and touch people's, like, essentially their souls, you know. It's just like so maternal in a way, or comforting, and I think it's so much more like in, like, you know, like I don't know, it's just so much more than even seeing or movies or stuff like that. But so
Yeah,
to have
I
these movies that are engross this music is just makes, in my opinion, like some of the best type of movies. But yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely think like you said, music is storytelling, and I feel like the reason we are so drawn to films, to TV shows, to music, you know, there's an intrinsic part of us that craves connection, and storytelling is one of the purest ways of doing that, of connecting with the the people around us. That is something that has gone back thousands and thousands of years, you know, cave paintings on the wall, the most primordial forms of music we have wanted to create and connect through storytelling since we began, you know. And there's something so beautiful about coming to a film that really gets to the core of that and draws upon music, this other form of storytelling, this other form of connection, to really kind of heighten that and really create that kind of pathway for that connection.
Yeah,
That's why
yeah,
we're here. That's why we want to
Mhm.
make art at
Mhm.
all.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then I won't dwell on this too much because we have already spent a lot of time on this question, but I did want to throw out one more, and that
Feel
was
free.
between George Miller making movies about a post-apocalypse in the desert and like craziness, he made a movie about singing penguins, and it's fucking amazing. I goddamn love Happy Feet and
It's
Happy Feet
iconic.
2.
Mhm.
It's
Fucking
iconic.
so good.
Legendary.
Just had to throw that out there before we
It's-
completely wrapped up. Austin, thank you so much for being on. I had an absolute blast talking to you. If people want to hear more of your stuff, and of course they would want to, why don't you tell them where they can find it?
Well, you can find me talking about all things sound for film on TikTok. I am at aok.wav. As we mentioned before, I am a professional. I work professionally as a sound editor. And so this kind of sound for film is my world. It is my favorite thing to talk about. So I geek out a lot over there. And if you want to hear some of my sound design work, you should listen to our podcast, The Legacy Saga. I do all of the sound design work for it, which is so much fun to kind of design and build out this world of fantasy and adventure. And I also voice the character of Atara on it. That is actually more terrifying than sound designing the episodes for me. But you know, we're about to wrap up our first season, so if you haven't started listening, now's a good time to start catching up. You can find us on all podcast platforms. Just look up The Legacy Saga. It should have a purple cover.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I've listened to it before. It's really engaging, and I have to say the sound quality is very, very good and makes me very self-conscious about editing this show.
Oh, dude, sound is so much harder than people give it credit for,
Oh my
dude.
God.
But
Yeah.
sincerely, thank you. That is actually a big compliment because trust me, whenever I go to upload an episode of the Legacy Saga, I'm always like shaking and like white knuckling my desk, being like, "Is this good enough? Is this? I could do one more mixed out. I could do one more pass." But there's a certain point where you just gotta let go.
You just gotta
And
let it out into
no,
the world. But it's
no,
incredible. I will say so. Everybody, go ahead and listen to that.
thank you.
And I will say we also do a couple other podcasts, as Ariel alluded to. We have our her podcast, I should say, You've Never Seen. So look that up. You've Never Seen with a question mark and exclamation point at the end, where Ariel will introduce usually either me or Alan or her brother to a movie that we really should have seen by this point. Sometimes we'll introduce her to something that is kind of iconic or just kind of legendary in pop culture, whatever it might be. So that definitely check that out. Whenever we do a new Marvel show, I have or a new Marvel movie or a show comes out, I do a podcast called Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones. So check that out as well. And then I also am going to be bringing back my TV podcast Gateway episodes. We're going to be doing a few 8-episode season as soon as we hit our Patreon goal. So anybody who wants to go ahead and hear that, go ahead and sign up on our Patreon. The first episode's out, and all the episodes will be dropping week to week once we hit that goal on Patreon. So if you can sign up, just get that and all the other stuff we do on Patreon. Just patreon.com/undercast company on all of the socials. Am I forgetting anything, Ariel?
I think you got everything. Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, in that case, thank you again, Austin, and thank you everyone for listening. I'll see you all next time.
Thank you for having me. It was such a joy.
Thanks for being amazing, everyone.